This episode of the Drum Break Podcast is brought to you by Polly's Custom Apparel.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the 10th episode of the Drum Break, where we talk about everything in, on, and about the percussion world. I'm Mike.
I'm Spencer.
So yeah, what do we got going on today?
Today is our 10th episode of the Drum Break. We've been on a little hiatus recently, but we're back in it. And we wanted to do sort of a little bit of a celebratory video about the entire sort of drumming experience, and we thought a good way to do that would be to give a little bit of a history lesson.
We're gonna bore you with a little bit of history.
Oddly enough, we're going to talk about the evolution of this instrument that we both love so dearly, the drum set, and give some cool facts and tidbits along the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, first Mike is going to plug some of our socials, and then we're going to plug a very special thing coming up. But first, Mike.
Yeah, so you can find us pretty much anywhere. We have two main social medias, Instagram and then our Facebook page, and those are both the Drum Break Podcast. It just so happens to be that Instagram's a little bit easier to access, so I check that more often. We try to check that one more often. So if you're really trying to get a hold of us or whatever it may be, you want to interview or you got something drum related you want to talk about, shoot us a DM or whatever it may be, or even an email, thedrumbreakpodcast at gmail.com. But yeah, if you're trying to listen, if you're trying to watch, we're on YouTube. We are also on Apple Podcast. We are on Spotify. We are also on SoundCloud, and then an app called Podbean. But yeah, so you may be noticing that to our behind us, I guess, because the camera is that way, we have something new to our set here.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Please explain.
So we have an awesome sponsor this episode, actually. It is Polly's Custom Apparel. Basically, they're a custom sort of graphic design company. So they service, a bunch of schools and companies around the area for, sports jerseys, club spirit wear, stuff like that. And they were awesome enough to send us this banner, which is so sweet. It looks amazing.
It is. Isn't it freaking awesome?
But yeah, they do super high quality stuff. They do screen printing, embroidery, and their prices are very competitive. A lot of places tend to, upcharge stuff like that, but they have very low costs for very high quality, and I would recommend if you have any sort of spirit wear or athletic
anything really
needs, for sure. You can DM us if you would like some more information as to contacting them. But yeah, so thanks to our sponsor, Polly's Custom Apparel, this episode.
Thank you. And just to piggyback off that a little bit, we've been using Polly's for I don't know,
at least since,
years. So they're, we've been with them prior to the podcast, and they reached out to us and were, so behind us, and it's different too, because I think they're different than every other company, because to me, they're not just like a t-shirt company. Mm-hmm. They're like somebody who really cares about.
They're small, they're local, but they such great quality, and we may be having some more collaborations with them in the future, to be determined.
Merch? Question mark.
You'll have
merch.
to wait and see on that one.
But yeah, so thanks again to Polly's Custom Apparel. It's pretty cool. So
for sure. But without further ado, let's get on into the nerding out.
Nice.
The drum history.
We like that here.
And there's a lot of stuff that we can cover. The history of drumming is very, very broad and goes back a long time. But for the sake of this episode's length, we're going to stick to sort of the origins and the evolution of the drum set specifically, which is our, favorite of the percussion instruments, I would say. But to start us off, before we even get into sort of drum set territory, there's a before step that we need to talk about, which is military drumming, which Mike will give us a little background on.
Yeah, so military drumming is it's something special because it's not just drums, and this is also pre-Civil War, but mainly used in the Civil War. So drums are like regular drums. They're made out of wood. They have, the shells made out of wood, and then the hoops are also made out of wood. And they were the drums themselves didn't really have any metal onto them, just because that time, they didn't really have anything like that. The technology wasn't what you see today. So they had something called rope tension, and it is what it means. You tighten the ropes on the drums. They go from hoop to hoop, which looks like hoop to hoop, but it's from head to head, skin, calf skin head. And what you would do is when you're, tightening, you unloosen a certain part, it's got like a little bit of ribbing on the back there, and you just go and you pull. And then, or they also have, on each lug, I guess you would say, I don't really know.
I guess attachment point.
Each attachment point, yeah, they had a little sleeve that would go to tighten it that way. So like, for fine adjustments, but for the main tuning, you really pull them hard, pull all the strings so they're nice and tight. But yeah, so that was kind of like what the drums used to look like. So the way that they would carry them, so from nowadays, we see something called a carrier, right? Or a harness is another word for it. And those are made out of metal or some sort of aluminum composite or whatever it may be. But back in the day, again, there wasn't that metal, the harness for those snare drums, right? Or bass drums. So they were put on these, like a sling is what they call it. That would be slung directly over your body, right? Like a sash, like a sash would be connected to the top part of the drum. And then when you're marching, you have it tilted, right? It's also, sometimes they were attached to your knee as well. You would have, a piece of string around your knee, right? So when you're marching, the drum would move and it's on an angle. Well, how do you play with something like this? You're not going to play like this, right? So they invented something called traditional grip. Traditional grip, I mean, it has stood the tests of time.
Yes.
Traditional grip is something that was started back then, and it's way used today. It's for a purpose, right? It's for that angle on the drum. You're compensating for that.
Because if you're just playing matched with the angle, you'd have like your arm all the way up here, and it would get very tiring very quickly.
Yeah, and so when they were playing, right, usually the drummer's first one out with flags. What you would see would be like the American flag, whatever battalion it is, and then the drummer, right?
Yeah.
Or not
multiple, maybe
multiple drummers, whatever it may be. But not only is it to keep them in time while they're marching, left, right, it's also to signal what's happening. Faster, slower, stop. All these rudiments had
different calls, different cadences, I guess you could call it, to communicate with the rest of the battalion.
You have, 500 soldiers behind you. How, you can't scream all the way over there, right? So they would have a set of drums, and then they would have maybe even another set if it's that big, so that they are all communicating and they can all tell, the rest of the soldiers what's going on. So that was kind of the military aspect of it, and it's pretty much carried on through now, Marines and everything, they still use rope
A
tension
lot of
drums to these
emphasis,
days.
yeah, on the percussion and the sort of musical, I guess, aspect of it, which
Yep,
is cool. It's nice that they keep that history around. Um,
it's important.
but so after the Civil War, a lot more sort of different styles of music were becoming popular. And one was sort of the vaudeville or musical theater, sort of theater type music. Um, and that would have sort of a normal, I guess, military type band, at least in the earlier days. But the problem with having a military band with sort of a military percussion section is that you have someone playing a snare drum and someone playing a bass drum and someone playing cymbals and multiple people playing all of those things. And if you're in like, an 1800s sort of theater in a pit,
Yeah,
you have no space for all those people. So this is where we start to see the beginnings of what we can call a drum set or a drum kit,
trap
because
set.
yeah,
Yeah,
because these drummers and these band directors were looking, so okay, how can I fit the most amount of drum in that I can. And what they came up with was sort of the origin of this thing called double drumming, or what they call double drumming, which is basically they would have one person playing a snare drum and a bass drum at the same time, which like now it's like duh,
yeah,
obviously, but back then it was kind of a big deal. So they would have the snare drum like maybe up on some chairs, or even like someone might be holding it or something,
yep,
and you would play the snare drum and the bass drum both with sticks, and that would be able to cut down the size of the orchestra or the band, but while not cutting down on the sound, I guess. And so that was sort of the thing for a little bit until we get into sort of the early 1900s and the start of sort of traditional jazz or ragtime and Dixieland and stuff like that. And that's when we begin to see a lot more sort of innovation as far as the equipment goes. Because then we have, Dixieland and, second line drummers who have these like big bass drums,
yeah,
and then they found out ways to attach the snare drum to the bass drum, so they didn't have to have like a separate thing. So you can have that. They invented what's called a low boy hi-hat stand, which is basically, if you imagine a hi-hat stand, it's like that, except all the way down
yeah,
by your shin. So you can't like play it like with a rock beat or anything. It was just used with your foot. But they had that kind of stuff going, and that sort of led to the invention of also the bass drum pedal. Because before that, you would have to play the bass drum with a drumstick. But now that you free up that hand, you get to add all sorts of more cool stuff. And that was a lot of the drum sets in the like 1910s, 1920s. They would just sort of have a snare drum, a bass drum, a low boy hi-hat, and then they would add all these little like sort of a tom up here and maybe like a cowbell or some
Yeah.
sort of wood block. And you can hear it a lot in like those recordings too. There's like this sort of characteristic like a little wood block
yeah,
sort of thing, but they would have like cymbal stands drilled into the bass drum so they could have crashes and stuff.
yeah.
And it was like just sort of a bunch of experimenting at that point.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny though, because like, these days we have specific hardware for specific symbols, for specific it gets crazy, how much stuff you can get. But then it was like, again, they no one thought of this stuff yet,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
So what was there to do? MacGyver.
Yeah.
Drill a hole there, put a metal thing in that,
Strap it on.
strap it on, like let's go. Like just whatever you can do to get it on there, do it.
Yeah, for sure. So that was sort of the main, I guess, early jazz type of drum set. And that sort of evolved through the big band era into something that's maybe more like what we would consider like a sort of normal drum set. The hi-hat would be able to be raised up so that you could play it with your hands.
The snare, was more adjustable to you. It had a separate stand for it. A basket is what they call it.
You could have separate stands for cymbals, tunable toms, which was a big thing because they didn't used to have tunable toms. And that was sort of, once we get into like the 1930s and the big band era, that was sort of the first instance of, hey, this is like a modern, quote, like drum kit. This is now a drum set, and we can call it a drum set.
Right.
And so after the big band era and into sort of like bebop and more jazz essentially filled a very large part of the early sort of American music.
Yeah.
And once, like, after big band and you get into, like, some bebop in the 40s and 50s and stuff, the kits started to get a lot smaller because, big band, you'd have all these, like, huge drums and stuff like that. But with bebop, it was just usually smaller ensembles. You would be gigging all around a city, and you don't want to lug, like, a huge drum.
Yeah.
So bass drums got really small. Toms got really small.
Yes.
Cymbals got bigger, which is cool.
Yeah.
But that was sort of like big band into the bebop drum set. And then sort of once we get after that era in the 50s and start getting more into rock and roll is where they sort of found like a middle ground where a standard, I guess you could say, was set for sort of sizes of drums. And like if you look up a picture of a drum set, chances are you'll see a classic sort of 14, 12, 13, 16 sort of setup, which was popularized after sort of jazz had left the mainstream, and when rock and roll had come into it.
Yeah, well, and plus, and going back to a little bit on the jazz, think about this, like nowadays it's like, hey, check out this song, I'll send it to my friend who lives around the world. But like, and like you put it perfectly, like jazz filled a giant hole.
Yeah.
But think of it, it, like you said, started in New Orleans, and it only just kept creeping out, and it just kind of did this, right?
Just sort of
for multiple years it did this
everywhere, up to Chicago, New York,
everywhere,
like all over the Midwest and the West, and it's
and and that's when after a little bit after that, like you said, we started to get more into rock and roll era, which was a big shock, going from something that's so smooth that and so artistic, and I'm not saying that rock and roll isn't artistic, but I'm trying to put myself in the mindset, something that's so beautiful to then, I mean, the Beatles, like when they came out there, everyone's like, what? Like the Beatles,
who are these guys,
like,
and why do I love them? Right?
But yeah, so like, people like the Beatles and Ringo Starr, he
obviously
he changed the game for most rock drummers. I mean, to this day, people
arguably like the first rock and roll like icon drummer.
Yeah, and it's funny because like I think we throw around rock and roll a little loosely these days, but like that was rock and roll back in the day. That was rock and roll.
Yeah.
Like and Elvis Presley, like he's he's not a drummer, but still like it's rock and roll, and
helped ushered in this sort of new era.
Yeah,
the post jazz era. I guess you could call it.
But it's weird though because the drum set just went through all these changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Smaller toms, smaller things, compact size, take it little, go. With rock and roll, no, bigger, better, more.
Because that became the introduction of like amplified instruments and microphones. And so now the drums had to compete with all these other instruments.
Yep.
And the drums got bigger, and the crowds got bigger, and the drums got bigger. And
yeah, it was just, and it really took off from there. It was, like you said, the drums were itty bitty. If you think of a jazz kit, when I think of jazz kit, I think of like 10, 14, and maybe an 18,
Yeah.
and then a 14-inch snare.
Sort of classic. If your bass drum is bigger than your cymbals, then it's not a jazz kit.
Yeah,
you know,
pretty much. But you know, when you get into that rock era, it changes so much. And then even after that, a little bit after that rock era, when we got more into the metal and you know, the punk and all that stuff, that's when, you know, gongs behind the bass drum, you know,
John Bonham,
and
you know, Neil Peart with the 360 kit,
1,000 toms, and you know, it's just cymbals got bigger, more chinas. I mean, what's that? You know, people are using cymbals with holes in them.
Yeah,
I mean, these guys are crazy. Like, it's big, it's loud. You know, like, I mean, you have 9 different pedals on the floor for 4 bass drums, like 7 hi-hats. What are you doing?
Yeah,
right. But that era is. I mean, it's awesome because that's where most of the music these days really took off from there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we have stuff that's even more
modern
than that, and it just keeps going, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in between, you know, the late 70s, early 70s to let's say late 90s, right?
Yeah, drums
started to be like, they're just drums.
Yeah.
So we started doing this thing with rubber drums. What's a rubber drum, you might ask?
That's funny.
So they started using these electric drum kits, right? So we're still having a drummer play, but they're these really thin little pads.
There's like drum pads. They don't make noise on their own, but if you plug it in, you know, have a whole host of different sounds. And I know obviously today it's like, well, yeah, you could just like press a button and have a billion different sounds.
Yeah.
But back then it was like crazy innovation, you know?
Yeah. And what always comes to mind when I think of like those electric drum kits is the big like octagonal pads. Like that was what they were. They were just these big rubber pads that were shaped like an octagon, and you had 1,000 of, or not 1,000, but you know, you had a lot of them. You had let's say 10, you know, all over the place as your drum kit, like, and you're just playing these little flat pieces of rubber that sound like nothing, but you know, you can assign all these different sounds to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can assign a howling monkey, or you can assign wind chimes, and
it just like opened the door wide open for
anything.
A lot of different stuff. And then sort of getting out of a little bit drum set territory with all the electronic sort of innovation came the first drum machines, the TR-808 and 909s and stuff. Which were used a lot in early hip hop and are still used a lot in hip hop and pop music. But that was, I guess, sort of a little bit sad for drummers because it felt like, you know, the machines are taking our jobs away, or something like that. But it you know, it was a great sort of, again, innovation to be able to get all of these different sounds on this little box. And it really impacted the world of hip hop a lot and sort of defined the genre. But like, again, that's not really drum set, but that's just sort of goes to show where the path of evolution has taken the instrument, you know.
You know, but it is drum set though, you know, because at the same time, I mean, yes, we're pushing buttons with our fingers.
Yeah.
We're still playing, you know, the drums are still the drums, right? Yeah. They may not sound.
They still fill the same role. They still have the same, you know,
they still have that same power behind the song. And like you said, you know, all these drum machines, right? Those were great. And then here comes another era, let's say, late 90s, early 2000s. To 2010s, right? More 2000s to 10s. And we're starting to see those drum machines disappear. Well, where are those drum machines going? Where are all these sounds going? On your computer. Samples. Right? I could take this whole drum set right here, this big old monster, and I could put each sound into one button.
Yeah.
Into one little file on my computer, right? That I can just drag and drop and multiply, subtract, whatever I want to do.
Like nowadays, music production is almost impossible without a computer.
Yes.
Like if you want to get, specific sounds or get sort of, hip hop, electronic, sort of modern pop sound, you almost need a computer because everything's been just localized and it's, very, very computer dependent,
Yeah.
which is good and bad, but I think ultimately it opens, again, as I said, it opens the door of possibilities
Yes.
to a lot of unique and new and different kinds of music to come out.
It does, and it also opens a possibility for more people to get into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Standard Mac things all come with GarageBand.
You can be, if you have a
right
Mac,
now, not even a Mac, you can do it on your phone.
Your phone comes with GarageBand.
If you have an Apple product within the last 10 years,
yeah,
you have GarageBand on it.
And you can
most
make
likely,
a song
right now
on your phone right now.
We could make a song right now.
Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should live stream.
We will
Make a
after the
song.
podcast. We'll make a song. We can go make a song right now. We can lay down lyrics right now without a microphone, just on my phone like this,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can make a song.
Yeah.
And that to me, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
The accessibility is crazy,
Right.
and like anyone anywhere can make anything
Yes.
nowadays.
Like, my 6-year-old niece, right? She can go on her iPad right now and make drum beats if she really wants to, or she can, be the next composer. It's endless possibilities, and that's not only drums. That's everything now.
Mhm.
Everything's digitalized. Everything's on the computer or your phone or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that kind of wraps up.
Yeah. I know at the end there we sort of got away from drum sets, but
Yeah.
honestly it's learning all this history about it has given us, I think, a greater appreciation for what we have now.
Yes.
And all the innovators of the past and what they've been able to do.
Yeah.
And it's great, and I will certainly be more, thankful the next
Right.
time I get to play something with my hand on my hi-hat instead of
Right.
having it all the way down by my foot.
Exactly. And but the thing with history, right, is that it does kind of go in a circle, right? Trends go into a circle, and fashion is what they say, right? And I'm starting to see that with drums again.
Oh yeah.
More of the newer artists, let's see, Post Malone, Billie Eilish, all those people,
There's
they-
sort of been, I guess, a retro sort of renaissance, I guess
Yep.
you could say. Like a greater appreciation for like analog and
Yeah.
acoustic stuff.
Yep.
And
I mean, just the other day I saw Machine Gun Kelly acoustic, and he's playing guitar
yeah.
with a couple guys, and it's just, and I've seen covers of Billie Eilish's band, it's a live drummer when she plays live.
Yeah.
It's a real drummer. He's on stage.
And that's not to say that the drums like ever went away, because they didn't. You had like all sorts of pop and punk in the 2000s and up until now with live drums, and you've always had rock bands and jazz bands and what have you. But it's just so cool to see like the revival of sort of the art of drumming, I guess you could say. And yeah, it's really cool.
So that being said, to wrap up our little drum history episode,
there'll be a test.
yes.
We'll send
we'll send out a Google test or whatever it is, Google survey. Just some cool little facts that we've done a little research on. The oldest drum to be discovered is actually an alligator drum. It was used in Neolithic China, and it was made from clay and alligator skin hides.
This is the reason why at the beginning of the episode we were like, all right, we're gonna stick to sort of the origins of the drum set, because if we were like
way back,
the first drum, we would be here for 5 hours. It's crazy.
The first drum that they've found to be discovered is 5500 BC. That's old.
It's and like not to toot our own horn or anything, but drums have pretty much been the center of like the human musical experience ever since we had one. But it's just even all the history that we've went over today. There's so much more.
Yeah, there is a lot more.
Gives us some perspective, but. Here's like a cool sort of more recent one.
This is crazy.
I guess I never really wondered about this, but now that I've seen it, it's crazy to me. The longest recorded drum session by an individual is 122 hours and 25 minutes.
That's long.
That's insane.
December 27th of 2011 to January 1st, 2012. Can you imagine playing drums for that long? How many days?
I mean,
that's like,
I wish I could play drums for that long, but I
wish
think I could.
I wish I could play for more than 2 hours without getting frustrated. You know how crazy? Like, I wonder what it looked like. There's just got to be a video of this.
That's crazy. I just that blew my mind when you showed me that.
Yeah,
man. But
the next one's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to say it? You can go for it.
I mean, yeah. This sort of goes back to offer a little bit more detail about what we've talked about already, but Ludwig was actually the drum company that first sort of developed a working bass drum pedal in 1909.
That's old.
Which it was old, yeah. But it just, that simple invention just completely changed the game, I think.
I mean, yeah, now I have two of them.
Exactly. You have two attached to each other so that
I can do digga with both feet.
Yeah. And without that invention, what we know is the modern drum set.
It would literally be kick
totally different. Yeah. You would kick it.
Yeah. This one was a cool one too, and this one I've been saying forever. Let me put this on record. I've been saying this for a very long time, but nobody else ever freaking pays attention to me. But drumming burns more calories in a half hour than cycling, hiking, and weightlifting in the same amount of time. So if I sat down right now and played drums for a half an hour, I would burn more calories than going for a bike ride for a half hour.
That's why I'm in such good shape. Yup. Oh man. Yeah, but drumming's hard work. It's fun work, Yeah, but
man.
It can be exhausting sometimes, physically and mentally, but
very much so. I think you should end with this last one here.
Yeah, this is a cool one. So we were talking about earlier about, after rock and roll and getting into metal and everything, all these sorts of different kinds of music, the drum set just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, we have here the largest drum set, like the world record for the largest drum set. Get this, 813 pieces.
That's a lot. That's not a lot.
That's not... I think your drum set is a big drum set, and this is a fraction of what this drum set is.
Probably not even.
It took 36 years to build, and it was built by Dr. Mark Temperado.
23 playable things on my drum
23.
set.
23, and this one has 813.
That would take
up...
Is that even 1%?
I don't even... That would take up like 2, maybe 3 full rooms.
It's got to be in like a stadium or a warehouse. Yeah, it's got to be somewhere crazy.
But
how long did it take him?
36 years to get all the equipment and I guess figure out how everything's gonna fit together. Dude, I assume it's playable. I don't think it's just a bunch of stuff thrown in a room.
I'm sure it is playable. I'm sure it is playable. I'm sure that was one of the things. Can you imagine trying to set a world record for 813 pieces and they're like, okay, now play every single thing on here. Okay, go. I'd be like, can you just count it?
That was like the last year. The 36th year was him just being able to play everything.
It took him one whole year to just play it. like every day he played like every day he played like 4 things.
Yeah.
Like okay, next day.
But that's pretty cool. I would never want a drum set that big. That's insane.
I would never want it, but I would love to see it and to be able to just go like this and hit things. That to me would just be interesting, just to like flail my arms to see what happens.
Yeah. Dang, that's crazy.
That is crazy.
But after that, I think we've about wrapped it up for what we had planned today. It was kind of fun getting to know some history. And some other cool things. But yeah, this has been the Drum Break Podcast. I hope you all have an awesome rest of your week. Peace out.
Peace.